Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today as we kick off the Spring 2023 NSF Virtual Grants Conference for this week. So I'm now pleased to present this session, which is going to cover the NSF merit review process.
Welcome. Let's get started. Next slide, please. I'm Colette St. Mary. I'm a program director in the Division of Integrative and Organismal Systems within the Directorate. And I will be joined today by Ellen McCallie, who is a program director in the Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Settings in the Directorate for STEM Education, and Karen Santoro, our Assistant General Counsel for Ethics in the Office of the General Counsel, Office of the Director of the NSF. Next. Today, we're going to talk about proposal and award timeline and some key reminders for proposal preparation and submission, a little bit of detail of the review process and award processing, as well as conflicts of interest. In particular, we're going to touch on proposal preparation and submission, proposal reviewing and processing, including program officer review, proposal review criteria, the different types of review that we use, how to become a reviewer, managing conflicts of interest, and funding decisions. We'll also talk a little bit about award processing, how we issue awards. And I'll start off reminding you that you always are free to ask questions. If you have questions, reach out to us. Next. So this is a schematic of the submission and review process. It begins in the upper left corner there, where we announce funding opportunities. Of course, we also have long-standing opportunities that I'm sure you're familiar with, such as the career opportunity. Those are announced in our communications to the entire research and education community. And as such, members of the community prepare and then submit proposals to us, either via grants.gov or via research.gov. When they're submitted, they come to us, that is a specific program officer at the NSF, and that person helps to shepherd the project through the review process. Importantly, when it arrives, a project is evaluated for whether it's compliant with the submission requirements. And if it is not compliant and there is not time to have it updated, it may be returned without review. Once the project is deemed compliant, then it's ready to undergo review. And that might involve ad hoc review by individual experts in the field, panel review, or a combination of those two, or it may actually involve internal review. All of these depend on the program to which it is submitted. Once the review is completed, a program officer and often colleagues then evaluates the whole package, the project itself, all of the input from external reviewers and internal reviewers, and makes a recommendation. That recommendation is then considered by the division director that supervises that program officer, and they generally concur. They may ask for additional clarification to make clear why we're making the recommendations we are, but ultimately they concur. And either the project is declined and it comes back to to the organization with all the review and panel input we've collected, as well as that information that it's declined. If the project is recommended for award, then it goes to our division of grants and agreements, and ultimately results in funding to an institution. The timing of this process, we allow at least 90 days, 90 calendar days when we release a new opportunity for submissions before the deadline. Once a project comes to us, it takes approximately 6 months for us to complete that review, and the decision is processed. And then perhaps another 30 calendar days for an award to be delivered to the institution. Next, please. Some reminders when preparing proposals. It is super important to read the funding opportunity completely. That might be the solicitation, that might be the program announcement. If you have questions at that stage, you should reach out to the program officers associated with the program and ask for clarification. We enjoy those conversations. You should not hesitate to ask. Be sure to address all the proposal review criteria. And it's useful to understand the NSF merit review process as you're thinking about how to prepare your proposal. So I'm going to say a little bit more, for instance, about panel review and how that might influence how you draft your proposals. Try hard to avoid omissions and mistakes. And once you're ready to submit, do check over your proposal and verify that everything looks the way you intend it to. It is not uncommon for figures to somehow come across in some garbled way when the submission comes to us. So be sure to review all the pages of your proposal as you submit. Next, please. So when it comes to the program officer, as I said, it comes directly to the program that you have chosen in your submission, and it's looked at by a program officer associated with that program. That individual and associated administrative staff look at the project for compliance with the submission requirements. Is the project complete? Has it come in within the deadline, if a deadline exists? And does it meet all of the proposal preparation requirements that are stipulated in the solicitation to which it's submitted? NSF may not accept a project or may return it without review if it doesn't meet all these requirements. Sometimes we in programs receive projects that are outside of the scope of the program to which it's been directed. We make an effort at that point to identify a more appropriate home and then consult the PI about transferring the project to that program before it undergoes review. Next. So fundamentally, the overarching proposal award policies and procedures guide, the PAPPG, is your Bible when it comes to preparing and submitting a proposal. And that document shares our philosophy about review. Fundamentally, the National Science Foundation strives to invest in a robust and diverse portfolio of projects that creates new knowledge and enables breakthroughs in understanding across all areas of science and engineering research and education. To identify which projects to support, the NSF relies on a merit review process that incorporates consideration of both the technical aspects of a project and its potential to contribute more broadly to advancing NSF's mission, which is to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, to secure the national defense, and for other purposes. NSF makes every effort to conduct a fair, competitive, transparent merit review process for the selection of our projects. Next. So, talking a little bit more about proposals that are not accepted or returned without review. This is really critical because this is, of course, nothing you want to ever experience. So, if a project does not contain all of the required sections as described in the PAPPG, it is likely to be returned without review. Note, research.gov in particular has in place a lot of submission checks, which help to assure that these aspects of the project are in place. But it does not check on everything, so you need to be doing your own checking. For the PAPPG, the project summary is required, and it must include 3 sections: the overview and sections on intellectual merit and broader impacts. The project description, this contains the overall project description as you expect, but it must include a separate section in the narrative that's labeled broader impacts. It also must include results of prior support in the case that any PI on the project has prior support from NSF with an end date within the last 5 years. A data management plan is required as a supplementary document. And in the event that the proposal includes postdoctoral researchers in the budget, a postdoctoral research mentoring plan is also required as a supplemental document. Next. So, broader topics of projects that might be returned without review include the case where the project does not fall under the auspices of the National Science Foundation. So the research topic itself is outside our purview. If it's submitted with insufficient lead time before the activity it supports is scheduled to begin, this might apply, for instance, to conference proposals, then it might be returned without review. In the case that a full proposal has been submitted by a proposal who received a not invited response to the submission of a preliminary proposal, that proposal likewise will be returned without review. And finally, in the case where the project proposed duplicates or is substantially similar to a proposal that's already under consideration by the NSF from the same submitter, we do not allow projects to be submitted to multiple NSF funding opportunities at the same time. Next. If the project does not conform to the proposal preparation requirements, it might also be returned without review. These include those outlined in the PAPPG, such as page limitations and formatting instructions, font size, and the like, but they may also include specific program announcement or solicitation requirements. So if you're submitting to a special solicitation, it's particularly important to review what that solicitation asks for. And that solicitation may supersede what the PAPPG indicates in a particular respect. If the project did not meet an announced proposal deadline, which also includes the time of submission, if the project has been previously reviewed and declined and has not been substantially revised, programs may return without review if prior criticisms have not been addressed. And finally, if it duplicates another proposal that has already been awarded, in other words, if the project appears to ask again for support for work that's already underway by the PI. Next. So our guiding principles of merit review is that all projects should be of the highest quality and have the potential to advance or even transform the frontiers of knowledge. NSF projects should contribute more broadly to achieving societal goals, and that should be articulated in the broader impacts portion of the project description. Meaningful assessment and evaluation of NSF-funded projects should be based on appropriate metrics, keeping in mind the likely correlation between the effect of broader impacts and the resources provided to implement the projects. Or maybe said more simply, do be sure to request in the budget support for the activities that you're proposing and evaluation of their potential for success. Next. When evaluating NSF proposals, reviewers should consider what the proposers want to do, why they want to do it, how they plan to do it, and how they will know if it is successful. And what benefits would accrue if the project is successful, both in terms of intellectual merit and broader impacts. These issues apply to the technical aspects of the project, as well as the broader contributions. So we want to be thinking about these things with respect to both of our key merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. Intellectual merit encompasses everything to do with the potential to advance knowledge, whereas broader impacts are the potential to benefit society and contribute to the advancement of specific societal goals and outcomes. Next. We have 5 review elements that we consider as we review the intellectual merit and broader impacts of a project. What's the potential of the proposed activity? And to what extent do the proposed activities explore creative and original or even potentially transformative concepts? How innovative is what is being proposed? Is the plan for carrying out the proposed activities well reasoned and organized based on sound rationale? And does it incorporate a mechanism to assess success? The fourth is how well qualified is the individual team or institution to conduct the proposed activities? And are the resources that are requested or available at the PI's home institution or through collaborations, are they sufficient to carry out the proposed activities? Next. Briefly, the types of review. Ad hoc review refers to the process of sending out the proposal to individual experts who read only that proposal and provide an assessment of the project, both in terms of broader impacts and intellectual merit. Some projects may undergo ad hoc only review, although that's fairly rare. Panel review refers to face-to-face sessions, either in person or virtual, where groups of reviewers discuss and rank several projects. Panel reviewers may not have as specific expertise as ad hoc reviewers do for the same project. They usually have expertise that are more broadly in the topic area of the panel, such as the program hosting the panel. The majority of projects are reviewed at panels, but some projects may undergo panel-only review with no additional ad hocs. And even some projects may go to multiple panels representing different programs, and thus those projects may be more integrative or cross-cutting in theme. I would say that the combination of panel and ad hoc review is the most common at the NSF. But there are some projects that are reviewed entirely internally. That is by NSF program officers with expertise appropriate to the project. And these are specific types of projects in particular, such as planning proposals, rapid proposals, or eager proposals. Proposals that are submitted to raise opportunities or supplement requests, such as career life balance supplements or COVID supplements, as some of you have heard of. Conferences, when the conference budget, the proposal budget is under 50,000, are also reviewed internally. And I'll stop there and hand it over to my colleague.
Hi, I'm Ellen McCallie, and thank you, Colette. I am in the Division of Research on Learning in formal and informal settings in the Directorate of STEM Education. So I'm going to pick up where Colette left off, and we're going to talk about how reviewers are selected. So reviewers are recruited for their expertise, and that includes their specific content expertise related to the specific proposals that they'll be reviewing, their general science and/or education expertise, as well as lived experience, professional experience, geographic location, how new or established they are in the field, whether they've been PIs, etc. So in other words, we want panelists that represent the proposal and the nation. So how do program officers determine who should be a good reviewer? Well, first of all, we read the proposals very closely. We look at, have the PIs suggested any specific reviewers? Or have they said we'd prefer not to have these specific reviewers? And then we think about and go to the literature, what's going on in research and broader impacts in the specific area. We use journal searches to align reviewers with the panel of proposals. Former reviewers, people who have been declined, people who have been awarded. In other words, what we're really trying to do is look at what are the proposals on the panel, or if it's an ad hoc review only, what is the individual proposal about? And then making sure that the range of expertise that is needed for that panel is reflected in the reviewer background. Next slide, please. So if you want to become a reviewer, how do you become a reviewer? First, we suggest that you email the program officers of the program that fits your expertise. Now, in some cases, if you look on the NSF website, you will see individual names and emails. In other cases, you will find, for example, in the programs I work on, it will say drlazel@nsf.gov. Whether you email an individual or an alias, it goes to someone. including the aliases. I promise the aliases go to someone. And then we determine who's the best person to receive your email. So for example, if you send it to an alias and your expertise, let's say, is in public participation in scientific research, they'll forward your CV and information to me because that's the kind of proposals, that's the kind of panels I run. So what do you want your email to say to be helpful to a program officer in order to match your expertise with panels? 1, introduce yourself. What is your research experience? What is other related experience to the program? Share that you're interested in reviewing for the program. Ask when panels are likely to be. We'll share general timeframes if we can. The other thing is attach a 2-page CV that includes your current contact information. Do check to make sure that you're currently employed at where you say you're employed and that the email address is correct. And then stay in touch with us. It is good to email us a couple months before the deadline or the target date of a program, and then to email us approximately at the same time each year to keep yourself on our radar. We don't keep lists of potential reviewers. Now, why would you want to become a reviewer? It's great professional development experience. It allows you to see internally all the things that Colette talked about in terms of our merit review process. So if you want to learn to write a great proposal and you want to contribute to the National Science Foundation mission, serving as a reviewer is a really helpful way to do it. Next slide, please. So what is your role as a reviewer? Well, you'll be reading a lot of proposals. The number of proposals depends on the program. And when you read the proposals, we're asking you to analyze the quality of the proposal in terms of both the intellectual merit and the broader impacts merit review criteria. The program also may have specific additional criteria, and if so, analyze for that as well. And so when we say analyze, we're not asking you to say the proposal said this, but asking you to actually comment on the quality, the innovation, all the 5 merit review criteria questions, and how well you think the proposal addresses them. Also, if you can address the adequacy or the strengths and weaknesses of the proposal with respect to budget, resources, and timeline, that's also helpful. And then if there are scientific priorities in the field that you are aware of or in the NSF program, to comment on those as well. The risks and benefits of the project is always helpful. And we ask typically that you organize it in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Therefore, we can potentially address some of them with the proposer before an award is made. Now, we want you to make independent written comments about the quality of the proposal. These are confidential reviews. You may not share them with anyone else, with the proposal or your review. So we ask that you upload those into the NSF systems before the panel. Or in case of an ad hoc, you upload that and then there isn't a panel discussion. It just depends. Next slide, please. So what is the role of a review panel? Well, before a review panel is convened, all of the individual reviewers have been assigned specific proposals. You all have read them, reviewed them based on their intellectual merit and their broader impacts. And so when you come together as a panel, the goal is to discuss the proposals based on your expertise. And then there's a person assigned for each proposal that will write a summary of the discussion. This is not a compilation of each of the individual reviews, but actually a summary based on the discussion the individual panelists have at the panel. So the PIs receive basically a summary of what did the panel think were the most important strengths and weaknesses? Where did the panel align? Where were there divergent views? This is also what NSF uses as recommendations to consider when making an award or declining a proposal. So in other words, the role of the review panel is really important. Bring out the most important strengths and weaknesses of a proposal relative to intellectual merit, broader impacts, and any other solicitation-specific review criteria, and then give the merits and the weaknesses of the different proposals. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this earlier, but early and often on why to serve on an NSF panel. Well, you're serving the community by bringing your expertise to bear to inform and guide research and education investments at the National Science Foundation. You also gain firsthand knowledge of the merit review process, which will strengthen your proposal that you write. You learn about common problems or issues with proposals, so again, strengthening your ability to apply. Discover proposal writing strategies, absolutely. Also, reviewers typically comment on how important it is to have discussions with colleagues, because typically the colleagues on our panels have a range of expertise, but are all related to the panel and the proposals on them. In addition, you get to meet with program officers, and you may learn about the job. You may want to end up being an NSF program officer, either a rotator or permanent. Next slide. So I'm going to turn this slide over to my colleague, Karen Santoro.
NSF's review process is known as the gold standard because in addition to rigorous scientific review, we do take conflicts of interest very seriously. Why? First, to remove any bias due to a panelist's affiliations with institutions and individuals that could affect the review. And second, to ensure fairness and to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. Next. When you serve on an NSF panel, you become a government employee. And as a government employee, you are subject to federal ethics rules and regulations, including those covering conflicts of interest. Examples of institutional affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest laws include your employer. If you're a professor at a university, you will not review a proposal from that university because the law treats the university's financial interests as if they were your very own. Other examples of covered institutional affiliations include anywhere else you hold a position. You're an ad hoc faculty at a different university, or a consultant for a company. If you're looking for a new job, you won't review a proposal from that potential employer. If you're on the board of directors of an organization or serve as an officer of a scientific society, you will not review proposals from that organization or the society. Next. Examples of individual affiliations that are covered by the conflict of interest laws include your spouse, business partner, PhD advisor, and your PhD students. Your co-PIs and co-authors in the last 4 years and your co-editors in the last 2 years are also covered. We're seeing more situations where there can be 50 or 100 co-authors or 20 or 30 editors. If you're in one of these situations and you don't even know all the co-authors or co-editors, please be sure to let the NSF program director know this, because NSF may be able to waive these types of conflicts. In closing, it's very important to let NSF know about any affiliation you have with an individual or an institution in a proposal, even if it didn't appear on these slides. This disclosure allows NSF to determine whether there is a conflict, and if so, how best to manage it.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, so now we're going to talk about funding decisions. So the merit review panel, you as a group, as a merit review panel, provides a recommendation, not a decision with respect to funding. So you all review each of the proposals, you discuss them, you write up a panel summary as appropriate, and then recommend the proposal, typically highly competitive, and not competitive. You're also providing strengths and weaknesses to the proposal, and the proposers, as well as NSF. NSF program officers take your recommendations They look at the program goals and they consider what's been funded previously, and then also all the different panels on the same, that are being run for the same program. And then we make recommendations. The recommendations then go to the NSF division directors, who either concur or reject the program officer's funding recommendations. After that, it goes to our Division of Grants and Agreements. Next slide. So what do the proposers receive after the merit review process at the National Science Foundation? Well, you receive reviewer ratings by reviewer. So each reviewer will rate your proposal as excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. You'll also get from each reviewer an analysis of how well your proposal addresses the intellectual merit and broader impacts merit review criteria. This includes the strengths and the weaknesses. And then if it is a decline, program officers typically include program officer or PO comments with the primary rationale for the decline. One thing that people often don't do is if they receive a decline, they don't contact their program officer to then discuss it with them. One of the things that my colleagues and I really appreciate is when PIs who are declined make an appointment with us via email, and then we'll meet with you. I'm interested in hearing what you heard from the panel summary, from the individual reviews. Does that align with what I heard when I was running the panel? And then you may have questions for me about the panel, about the process. One of the things we're here for is public service. We want great proposals to come in. We want, as the National Science Foundation, to be able to fund great proposals. So oftentimes talking with a program officer, either before you submit or after, can be helpful in that process. And the best way to contact most of us is by email. Next slide, please. So let's go back. What will you receive? You'll receive the verbatim copies of the individual reviews, but they will be anonymous. You won't know who the reviewers are. A summary of the panel discussion, which we call a panel summary, if the panel process was used. A process statement. Now, the process statement is more of a global description of the competition that your proposal was a part of. And then PO comments, program officer comments, may be available if you are declined. You won't get program officer comments if you're awarded. You'll get an award letter. Next slide. So let's talk about some reasons for declining a proposal. The proposal was not sufficiently strong, sufficient quality to be competitive based on intellectual merit and broader impacts. The proposal has flaws or significant issues that are identified by the panel and or a group of program officers, or program funds were not adequate to fund all the proposals that were worthy. Next slide. So if you have been declined, what can you do? You can revise and resubmit. So the points to consider, what are the strengths of your proposal? What are the weaknesses of the proposal? How can you strengthen both? Now, each time your proposal is reviewed, it's by a different set of people. So it's not going back to the same reviewers as last time. So it's helpful to think, okay, so these reviewers suggested this. Does that make sense? And ask that question specifically. If you think you said something in a proposal and yet several of the reviewers comment that they didn't see it, you may want to strengthen or change how you make that point. Because we have proposers who think they said something well, but if a number of people don't get it, reconsider how you say it. Go ahead and use labels and highlight things to make it easier to find and to make your arguments clear. You may want to, in addition to meeting with a program officer to discuss what you understood about your reviews, you may also want to have the next version of your proposal read by some of your colleagues, not your closest colleagues who already know what you're trying to do, but a slightly one step removed colleague to get some input. And again, either submitting a concept before you propose, before you submit a full proposal, or contacting a program officer after you're declined. Those are ways to learn more about the process and to get more feedback about your individual proposal. One thing I must say, if someone wants to meet with me, one of the things I want to know is, what did you hear from the reviewers and from me in my PO comments to make sure we're aligned? That kind of, so if you come into a meeting and say, program officer, what do you think? I typically turn it around and say, what did you hear from the reviewers? What is your strategy for strengthening your proposal if you're going to resubmit? Next slide. So the NSF reconsideration process. If you think that your proposal did not receive a fair review process, this is not, if you do not like what the conclusion was. I mean, none of us like to be declined. But if you don't think that the merit review process was run fairly, then you can request a reconsideration meeting with your program officer. Now, this is outlined in the PAPPG, and it's very clear what the process is. First, you meet with the program officer and/or division director, and you state what your concerns are about the merit review process. And typically after the explanation, typically it ends there. If you because a lot of times people aren't clear about what the process is, and it's helpful to hear the review process. Now, if you still think you didn't receive a fair review, within 90 days of the decision, you can provide a written request for reconsideration, meaning for it to go to, be it paneled or a similar merit review process again, but you need to do that within 90 days. If you want to escalate it further, you can submit to the Deputy Director of NSF within 60 days. But let's go back. The key component is, was your proposal fairly reviewed? Not, I didn't like my reviews, or I'm frustrated that people found weaknesses in my proposal. There's a real difference there. So do look at the PAPPG, and it's also why it's really important to learn about the merit review process, because the more you know about the merit review process, including serving on a panel, the stronger you can make your proposal, because you'll understand how your proposal is reviewed. Next slide. So possible considerations for funding a competitive proposal. So to get your proposal funded, there is no magic bullet. There is no tick box. If I do this, 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 and this, NSF has limited funding. So how can you best submit a proposal that is strong? Review all the merit review criteria and read the program opportunity very closely. I read it at least 3 times a year, even if I helped write it, because it's important to really have a nuanced understanding of what's being asked. And then be very clear about how your proposal relates to the goals of the funding opportunity. Are you proposing something that aligns with the merit review criteria? Is it likely to have high impact? Is it likely to broaden participation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? Is it likely to have an educational impact? Will it have impacts on other parts of the STEM education or research endeavor? In other words, broader impacts. Are there special programmatic considerations? And then talking about, and then other support for the PI. So prior NSF support. So there's components like that I think Colette already talked about, prior NSF support. If you have prior support, you need to address that in your proposal. So if you skip something, oh, that's not so important, and it's a required NSF component, it can come back, or you may not receive as high marks as you would like. So anything that's required, make sure you include, write things as clearly and transparently as you can. Get feedback on your proposal before you submit it. those are some things that you can do. Now, one of the things that NSF has to look at, because we have limited funding, is a portfolio balance. Now, that term, what does it exactly mean? It means we do need to look at geographic distribution. We need to look at new performers, new PIs, new ideas. And so there's a range of things that are considered. On our website, you can see what has been funded before. And so you can get a sense of the kinds of things that a program funds. It's also a great way to then think, oh, okay, so look at all the different ways this program innovates. And then you add your innovation to that. Next slide. So how do we issue awards? Well, it's not the program officer, it's not the division or even the directorate that issues awards for NSF. It's the NSF Division of Grants and Agreements, otherwise known as DGA, that reviews the recommendation from the program, and then it analyzes it for business, financial, and policy implications. And then the NSF Grants and Agreement Officers make an official award, assuming that it has adequate grants management capacity, that you don't have annual or final reports overdue, and that there's no other outstanding issues with the institution or the PI. So if you already have an NSF award, or any of your colleagues that are PIs or co-PIs on awards with you, make sure those annual and final reports are in. All right, next slide. So for more information, ask early, ask often. You can look who we are up at nsf.gov staff. Also, think about looking at the programs you're most interested in, reading those solicitations, going to that webpage. Solicitations are other kind of proposal opportunities. Go to the webpage, read the abstracts of things that have been previously funded, attend webinars, offer to review for programs. And then also think about serving as an NSF, a rotator to NSF, or a permanent program officer. Thank you very much. And we'll take questions.
Okay, thank you. And welcome back to our presenters, Colette and Ellen and Karen. So we've all been answering questions, fiercely typing over the past 45 minutes. So hopefully you're getting in there and seeing a number of the responses that have been given. But I wanted to first, before we kind of go into some of the other questions that are there, Ellen, Colette, Karen, are there things that you saw or answered that you feel like you want to expand on a little bit? Trends or questions that you're seeing that you felt like you wanted to kind of go into a little bit more depth on? If not, we can kind of dive right into some of these other questions, but I wanted to give you that opportunity first. Okay. Got the answer. All right. So, so I marked a number of these questions to answer live. I wanted to make sure we had some to discuss, and you can keep submitting your questions and but I wanted to just start off by talking or asking questions about communication, right? Because we got some questions about talking to NSF program officers. When should I talk to them? When should I check to see if where my proposal is? How do you prefer to be reached and discuss either a proposal that is being considered or a proposal that's been submitted? What can we tell folks about that part of the process?
I'll take that one. Calling us up is really hard. We attend a lot of meetings, or we're deep in thought considering a proposal, so I'd suggest emailing us. Now, who to email? I think I mentioned this in the presentation. Some programs have aliases like drl@nsf.gov that's monitored. So it's always a good idea to send it directly to that. If there is an alias for the program, if there's a list, you can just send it to one person on the list. What we ask you not to do is don't email all the people on a program on the list of program officers individually. If you're going to email more than one program officer, put it on the same email. We do talk to each other, And if we find out that one person is emailing a bunch of us, it's kind of frustrating. We have to coordinate. It's easier if you do if you email either one person or a couple of people on the same email. Now, if you have a concept, it's easier for us to read the 1 page or some programs accept a 2-page concept, a 1 to 2 page concept in advance of speaking with you. So we'll read it, we'll either respond to you by email or we'll make an appointment. The reason we ask that we don't just talk about your concept, but we typically have something in writing is all the NSF review processes are in writing. So for us to be able to see how you're talking about something, we can provide more detailed responses. How's that, Jeremy?
Sounds great. Colette, anything to add to that?
I think I would add, speaking on the other side, once a project is in, do feel free to check back with us to ask about the status of a project that's been in review after it's been in review for 6 months or so, because before that, we don't have anything more to tell you in most cases, other than it's under review. But once a project has been declined, we would be very happy to talk with you. Send an email, make an appointment to talk about the reviews that you've received. We are very, very happy to discuss how to interpret those reviews and what you might do to be more successful in the future.
Okay, we have a question asking about compliance reviews by the program office. Now we have systems that do an initial compliance review as you're preparing your proposals and submitting them to NSF and research.gov, and we put a lot of thought and effort into how to make that process easier for you so that you are submitting a compliant proposal. But could you talk a little bit about the process of what happens when the proposal comes to your desk and and that whole compliance review prior to a proposal going for review?
I can say something about that. In my experience from the Directorate, compliance checking is an all hands on deck kind of process where staff and program officers are working together to look at different aspects of the compliance of a specific proposal to a solicitation. While staff may be focusing on some of the structural aspects, is this document present or not? Program directors might be looking at the actual fit and whether specific criteria for the solicitation have been met. So that process, especially with a program that has a deadline, is done largely all at once, and then decisions are made and we can move on to a review stage. For programs that are running with no deadline, and so projects are coming in regularly, then often we take, every couple of weeks, we take a bit of time to focus on what's come in the most recent couple of weeks and check it for compliance. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, we have a question asking about the diversity of review panels, but I wanted to take that question and ask you about your process for putting review panels together and getting ad hoc reviews. What does that look like from your perspective?
So we have proposals come in, hundreds, thousands, depend on the program, tens, usually hundreds. And then what we need to do is to divide them into panels or groups where we can get a sufficient number of reviewers with the range of expertise needed for the panel. And so it's a huge puzzle. And so we put things into panels thematically or based on, it could be based on theoretical framework, it could be based on audience, it could be based on research methods. It really depends on the proposals that come in and the number of them. Once we have panels, program officers then start looking for reviewers that can evaluate all the different components of each of the proposals, and we supplement that if needed with ad hoc reviews. On occasion, we'll ad hoc a proposal, or some programs ad hoc every proposal. Most programs put things on panels and then supplement with an ad hoc or two. And then, so I guess the part of the question was the diversity. You know, one of the things that we make a case for is who's on the panel and why. So that has to do with, you know, the range of expertise, the geographic distribution. It may have to do, geographic distribution, it may have to do with the demographics of the reviewers, but we make the case of why this is a reasonable, solid set of panelists to review the proposal. Colette, do you have additional comments on that?
Well, I think it's worthwhile to add that we are constantly attempting to have as diverse of representation as possible. And in saying that, I mean, we're looking at career stage, we're looking at ethnic and racial diversity, we're looking at representation across the nation, we're looking at kinds of institutions from which those reviewers are coming, and trying to diversify on all these axes simultaneously with having the appropriate scientific expertise.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about funding decisions. So if a proposal is reviewed and it is deemed to be not competitive, does that mean that it would not be a good candidate for resubmission? Perhaps you could talk about that and the resubmission process and what you would expect to see from a proposal that was declined and then resubmitted.
I saw that Ellen had answered that question at least once in the stream, but it is a very important one. Not all programs use not competitive, but most of those that do mean by that this project as written right now. In fact, the reviews and the panel ratings are explicitly about this project as written right now. It is quite rare, at least in my experience, that a project has no future whatsoever. However, if you've received a not competitive rating from your project, this is a particularly important time to reach out to a program director and hear more about the review and talk with them about how to synthesize all the information you've received in the review, which will consist of individual reviews as well as a panel summary. So definitely reach out to your program director and talk about that case. Ellen, did you want to add something?
No? Okay. So then perhaps we can talk about, again, in sticking with funding decisions, obviously we get way more proposals than we can fund. NSF funds approximately 11,000 proposals per year. So you perhaps often have competitive proposals, but not enough funding for them. So can you talk about that a little bit in terms of how do you make those decisions when there are competitive proposals and not enough money to go around?
This is the daily situation. We may have too many highly competitive proposals for the funding. It just depends. It depends on the year, it depends on the program. So how do we do it? In most programs have more than one panel. So not only are you looking within a panel, but you're calibrating across panels. And so the panelists make recommendations, as we described earlier, and then programs look at proposals across everything that's been submitted, and then we make recommendations. So not every highly competitive proposal will be funded. Some competitive proposals may be funded instead of highly competitive. It's a balance. It's a puzzle, because sometimes there are proposals that are high risk, high reward, and so it gets a competitive. But the reviewers say this really could be transformative, and it's risky. And so it is, we don't use cut scores. And so it is a lot of discussion and really relying on the input of the reviewers. It is, yeah, so it's not cut score. So everything isn't ranked 1, 2, 3, 4 in most programs. We're also looking to see that we're funding across the range of what a program can fund in. So that's not saying if you get 3 great proposals about X, we won't fund all of them. We may fund cohorts of projects about the same thing, but we also look across the spectrum of what could be funded. So it is a puzzle, and that's one of the reasons we encourage you to apply to be a program officer, so you can unpack that with us.
So this is something that we call portfolio balance. We're looking at our whole portfolio. We're looking at the topics that the projects are about, the actual strengths and weaknesses, what we funded recently, where those projects are, how this research team may be unique or underrepresented in our funding portfolio. So as Ellen was saying, it is a really hard puzzle. I am thankful that I'm always working with colleagues to make those decisions, that I don't have to make them all by myself.
Great. So Ellen, you mentioned in your response about scores, and we have a question kind of following on that in terms of ratings. And the question is really like, well, how are these ratings given? Are they given for intellectual merit? Are there separate ratings for broader impacts? Is there an overall score? Could you both perhaps talk about how ratings are used in your programs?
I'll start and then turn it to Colette. So when a reviewer looks at a proposal, we ask them typically to rate it highly competitive, competitive, low competitive, not competitive. Some programs only use highly competitive, competitive, and not. Highly competitive, competitive, and not competitive. A couple programs use a different system. In any case, we provide specific instructions that are consistent across all the panels. And so the reviewers individually, they rate each proposal. Individually, the reviewers rate each proposal excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor, based on the alignment to the solicitation and the 2 merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts. Then together, the panelists discuss the proposals, and they may have very widely ranging individual ratings. They could, I've seen it go from excellent to fair. And then they discuss the proposal, and then collectively they rate it as highly competitive, competitive, low competitive, and not competitive. And the highly competitive and the competitive categories are ones that are seen as ready for funding this year, just with a priority. Highly competitives are seen as more ready or more important. Competitives are seen as, yes, if it's possible, or there may be some, there may be something that the program officer is highly recommended to check before moving forward. So I'll start there, and Colette, please help with this one.
So actually, I think my perspective on this has kind of evolved over the years that I've been working at the NSF. It used to strike me as a very straightforward system, much as Ellen just described. But now, while I do take the reviewer ratings and the panel rating as a piece of information, I put my focus to a much greater extent on what are they saying in the reviews and in the panel summary? What are the key strengths and weaknesses of a particular project? And how does that justify the rating that's given? Just as you know, in your classrooms, there are generous graders and there are hard graders. We have the same thing going on in our review process. So it's the substance of what is being said that ultimately makes the difference Focus on the substance if you're looking at reviews to understand how that contributed to the fate of your project.
And I think I want to build on that one more piece, because that's where we look across panels, and that's how. And when I mentioned that we don't fund all the highly competitives, we may fund a competitive. I mean, that's based on the content and also how it looks across the range of proposals, across the range of panels. So it is complex.
Great. The next question is asking about research that needs to be done prior to a proposal being submitted. And the question is, how much background or previous research is generally required for a proposal, or is that something that's really depends on the project that's being proposed?
I'll chime in on this one. So the most important thing is that when reviewers read your project, they look at it and they are struck, this is an important study, it is well justified, it is feasible, it is the right course of research to pursue this question. And if they have any doubts of that, you want to help to fill in those gaps. Preliminary data can fill in some of those gaps. Yes, this is an important question. Look, we have this evidence that this phenomenon is going on. However, you may not have any preliminary data. The preliminary data may be in the literature. Your project may be taking a new direction, but the literature is sufficient to support that it's an important direction, that the approach you're taking is feasible and will lead to important results. There's no a priori amount of this previous research that fits the bill. It's how you are able to justify the research and to make a compelling case that you will be able to move the field forward with the approach you're taking.
Great. There is a question about community colleges that I want to bring up, and I really want to distill this down to what advice do you have for community colleges who do not currently get a lot of funding from NSF? But I know NSF is really trying to do more with community colleges. So what do you say to somebody at a community college to help them be more competitive with an NSF proposal?
It looks like you wanted that one, Colette. I can follow you.
Okay. So I would first encourage you to look for those programs that are targeting bringing research opportunities to a broader diversity of institutions. I'll mention one in bio, although it is just one of many of these sorts of programs that exist now at the NSF. The Building Research Capacity Program in bio, BRC Bio, targets institutions that are not amongst the most research intensive in our country, and in particular is trying to engage new faculty at other institutions to establish research in the context of their other professional obligations, teaching in particular. These are great opportunities for faculty at community colleges as well. But I'll also say collaboration is another avenue to greater success. It is very challenging when you are at an institution where research is not the norm for faculty to establish a research program on your own. To have a partnership with another institution close by to you of any other type really might be a means to help to establish what you need and to gain access to the resources you need in terms of equipment, for instance, to do what you'd like to do.
I don't.
Ellen, did you want to jump in? No?
No, that's exactly what I would have said.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time for this session. So I want to thank you, Colette, Ellen, and Karen for joining us today. I want to thank all of you for attending. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everyone.